The air in the United Nations General Assembly Hall was thick with a quiet, nervous energy. Delegates from every nation sat perfectly still, their eyes fixed on the empty space in the center of the room. Cameras from global networks broadcast the silence live. No one knew what to expect. The message from the entity calling itself the Galactic Council had been clear about the time and place, but nothing else. A shimmering light began to form, like heat rising from asphalt. It grew, pulsed, and then solidified into a being. It was tall, over 8 feet, and its body seemed to be made of interlocking crystals of pale blue and violet. It had no face, just a smooth surface where one would be. But when it spoke, a voice echoed from within, sounding like stones sliding deep under a mountain. I am Loomis, emissary of the Galactic Council of 100 species, the voice said. No mouth moved. This communication is a formal notice, not an invitation for debate. You are a young species, designated humanity of planet Earth. Solar System 88,947 Beta. On a monitor in a secure underground bunker in Seoul. A man named Jay leaned forward, his elbows on the metal table. He was a tactical analyst, his face lined from too many screens and too little sleep. Next to him, Min watched with wide, tired eyes. She was an AI ethics coordinator, and for the last 48 hours, her job had shifted from planning guidelines to predicting alien behavior. They were two among hundreds in the newly formed Earth Defense Directorate, a desperate attempt to create a unified response. Loomis continued, the crystal facets of its body catching the light. Your species exhibits a concerning developmental trajectory. Your expansion into your local planetary cluster, your primitive but aggressive AI seedings, and your experiments with warp field mechanics are conducted without oversight, regulation, or respect for galactic stability. In the hall, the Russian delegate shifted uncomfortably. The American president stared ahead, her face a mask. The Council, which has maintained peace and order for millennia, cannot allow a volatile, emotional species to disrupt the harmony. Your history is a chronicle of conflict and irrational action. Therefore, you are hereby issued a compliance edict. Min's hand went to her mouth in the bunker. Jay just scowled, his jaw tight. You have one standard solar cycle, Loomis said. A series of symbols, which translated on every screen as 10 Earth years, flashed in the air beside it. You will cease all off-world industrial activity. You will dismantle your installations on your moon and on Mars. You will cap your planetary population at its current level. Most importantly, you will surrender all research and development into artificial general intelligence and faster-than-light physics to a council stewardship team. Who will decide what, if any? Knowledge you are mature enough to hold. A murmur, quickly silenced, rippled through the assembly. Failure to comply fully and verifiably will result in the quarantine of your species and your world. This is a permanent measure to protect galactic society. Loomis paused, letting the translation settle. The term quarantine, in this context, refers to a targeted orbital bombardment of all major population and industrial centers, reducing your civilization to a pre-industrial state. Your species will be preserved, but your capacity to threaten the stars will be removed. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a sentence, a death sentence for their future. Loomis's crystalline form began to shimmer again. The Council's judgment is final. Your cycle begins now. There will be no further communication until your compliance is due. And with a final pulse of light, the emissary was gone. It left behind not a single physical trace, only a smell of ozone, and the crushing weight of its words died in the hall. Chaos erupted. Shouts, questions, cries of anger and fear in a dozen languages. The video feeds cut to panicked news anchors in the Seoul bunker. The silence was different. It was heavy, like lead. The dozen people in the room looked at each other, then at Director Hana, who stood at the front. She was a woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes that had once been known for their warmth during diplomatic summits. Now they were cold, calculating. "So," Jay said, breaking the quiet. His voice was flat. "They think we're toddlers. Noisy, messy toddlers who need to be put in a playpen for 10 years before they decide to burn the house down. Their assessment is not entirely wrong about our history." "Jay," Min said softly, her mind already racing through the ethical implications of their own potential responses. "We are chaotic." "Chaotic isn't the same as stupid," Jay shot back. "They just declared they'll kill billions if we don't lobotomize ourselves. They didn't offer a seat at their table. They didn't offer mentorship. They offered chains. And then a gun to the head." Director Hana walked slowly to the main screen, which now showed a frozen image of Loomis. "They see our emotions as a weakness, our rapid progress as a danger. They are ancient, and they are terrified of change." She turned to face the room. "They have made a critical error, however." "What's that?" someone asked. "They gave us a deadline," Hana said, a hint of her old fierce smile touching her lips. "They are used to dealing with species that have been unified for centuries. They do not understand what 10 years means to us. They do not understand what a deadline does to humanity. It focuses us. It makes us desperate, clever, and unified in ways we never are in peace." "What are you suggesting, Director?" Min asked, though she feared she already knew. "I am suggesting," Hana said, her voice dropping, "that we do not spend these 10 years learning how to surrender. We spend them learning how to answer." She looked at Jay. "Tactical analysis of their technology. Based on that manifestation and the energy signatures we recorded." Jay called up data. "The crystalline form suggests a mastery of matter-energy conversion. The projection was likely a hard light hologram with a physical component, sent via a pinpoint warp conduit. Their power generation is orders of magnitude beyond ours. In a straight fight, with their implied fleet capabilities, we lose. In 6 minutes. Then we do not fight straight," Hana said. "Min, your A is. Could they simulate compliance? Could they generate false industrial and population data on a planetary scale?" Min blinked, her ethical brain wrestling with the survival brain. "Yes," she finally said. "With enough resources, we could create a digital ghost of a compliant Earth, but it would be the largest lie ever told." "Good," Hana said, as if she hadn't heard the last part. "Jay, we need to know everything about them. Not their technology, but them. Their politics, their culture, their history. Everything our telescopes, our satellites, our old city data have ever picked up. Find a weakness that isn't a power cable." Jay nodded, a grim spark in his eyes for the first time. "On it? The rest of you," Hana said, addressing the room, "begin drafting plans for Project Golem. We will appear to dismantle our industry. We will appear to shut down our research. We will appear to be the good, quiet children they want. And under the ground, under the oceans, in the dark side of the moon, we will build something else entirely." She looked back at the frozen image of the emissary. "They see a child throwing a tantrum. They have no idea what a human being does when you threaten their home. They have no idea what vengeance looks like when it has 10 years to plan." Outside the bunker, the world was plunging into panic and despair. But inside, a different kind of fire had been lit. It was cold, deliberate, and patient. The warning had been delivered. The clock was ticking. And Earth, for the first time in its fractious history, had a single, unified purpose: to make the Galactic Council regret ever looking their way. The world, for the first few months, was a storm of fear and protest. There were massive rallies demanding humanity submit to the Council for survival. There were darker, angrier groups calling for a defiant, immediate war. Economies teetered. The official stance from most world governments was one of stunned paralysis, playing for time. Only a handful of people knew the truth. Operation Jallarhorn was not a military plan. It was a lie on a planetary scale, and its architect, Director Hannah, was its most convincing actor. Her first move was public. She stood before a special session of the United Nations, her face a picture of solemn resignation. "The Galactic Council has shown us the limits of our ambition," she said, her voice heavy with a sorrow that felt utterly real. "For the safety of every man, woman, and child on Earth, we must accept their guidance. We will comply." The screen behind her showed grand, sweeping animations. Shipyards in orbit were shown powering down. The great lunar smelters went dark. The bustling base on Mars, the pride of human colonization, was displayed with figures in environment suits packing up equipment. The media broadcast it everywhere. The message was clear. Humanity was standing down in a hidden facility built into the side of a mountain in Norway. The reality was different. Jay rubbed his tired eyes, looking at a live feed from the Mare Imbrium on the moon. The public feed showed a silent, dead factory. The feed on his screen, marked with a classified cipher, showed the same factory, but 50 stories deeper. Gigantic presses were forging hull plates for ships that looked nothing like the exploratory vessels humanity had built before. These were angular, sharp, and utterly devoid of decoration. They were tools for a single purpose. "They're watching," Min said from a workstation beside him. Her domain was the digital ghost. Her teams had created an entire virtual Earth, a mirror world. All official transmissions, energy output readings, even seemingly private scientific networks, were filtered through her system. If the Council was monitoring, they would see a civilization winding down its ambitions. They would see population models trending flat. They would see research papers on warp theory being officially deleted from servers. They would not see the frantic secret work happening in the dark. "The Council's monitoring protocol is predictable," Min continued, calling up data. "They have Sentinel probes in high orbit, but they are not looking for hidden bases. They are checking for large energy spikes, for warp signatures, for the obvious signs of rebellion. They are looking for a child slamming a door. They are not looking for a child quietly picking the lock." Jay grunted. Arrogance. It was their greatest hope. The Council's technology was supreme, but their thinking was rigid. They had done this before, to other species. They expected either immediate, foolish defiance or total submission. The idea of a meticulously planned, decade-long deception was, Min's Psych Profile A is suggested, borderline inconceivable to them. The real work was scattered across the globe. In a lab buried beneath the city of Daejeon, a young materials scientist named Sue worked in near total silence. Her project was not weapons or engines. It was about hiding. For 2 years, she had been studying a peculiar meteorite sample recovered from an Antarctic dig. It had unique quantum resonance properties. Her theory was that if she could synthesize the material and weave it into a hull composite, it could cause sensor waves to phase right through an object, rendering it invisible to most detection methods. For months, it was failure after failure. Then, late one night, running a simulation for the 1,000th time, she saw it. A stable matrix. She worked for 36 hours straight, guiding the molecular printers. What emerged was a flat, dark gray sheet of material. It looked unremarkable, but when she placed it in the sensor bay and activated the standard LiDAR and gravimetric scanners, the readings came back as empty space, a faint blip of background noise. Her hands shook. She named the compound Veil Stone. The report went up the chain. Within a week, a small, stealthy shuttle collected Sue and her samples. She was brought to the Norwegian facility. Jay met her at the airlock. He looked at the small case she held as if it contained a holy relic. This works? Against their level of tech? We can only test it against our best simulations of their tech, Sue said quietly. But the physics are universal. If they are using subspace resonance or tachyon-based scanning, the veil stone should scatter and absorb the pulses. To them, our ships will look like shadows or ghosts. A real smile, the first in a long time, touched Jay's lips. Ghosts are good. Ghosts are scary. Back in her virtual world, Min faced a different problem. The deception had to be perfect. One of her junior programmers, a man named Tay, came to her with a worried look. The Council probes are doing a deep scan of the old Siberian industrial zones. Our fake energy readings are holding, but they're too perfect. The pattern is mathematically ideal. No civilization has a power grid that's perfect. Min's blood ran cold. It was a tiny flaw, a tell in their grand lie. A real, living, chaotic civilization had inefficiencies, random fluctuations. Introduce an algorithm, she ordered, based on old terrestrial power grid data from the 21st century. I want simulated brownouts in Jakarta. I want a fictional political dispute causing a power surge in the North American grid. Make it messy. Make it human. The lie had to breathe. It had to have a heartbeat. Meanwhile, Hannah traveled the world, not as a director of a secret war, but as a global compliance minister. She oversaw the decommissioning of the great orbital elevator in Ecuador. The public saw it being carefully taken apart. What they didn't see were the pieces being shipped, not to scrap yards, but to a new construction site in the remote Australian outback. There, under a vast engineered canopy that mimicked the desert from above, the first of the new ships was being assembled. Its frame was lightweight. Its engines were not the powerful but detectable fusion torches of old, but silent. Experimental ion drives that used Sue's veilstone in their exhaust baffles. Hannah stood in the cavernous hangar, looking up at the skeletal form of the ship. It was named the Willow Branch, after an old Earth saying about bending so as not to break. Jay stood next to her. The Council's historical data is interesting, Jay said, handing her a tablet. They haven't had a major conflict in over 3,000 years. Their tactics are procedural. Their ships are designed for intimidation and overwhelming force, not for fighting an enemy they can't see. Their greatest strength is their stability. It's also their greatest weakness. They don't innovate anymore. They just maintain. Hannah nodded. And we are nothing but innovation right now. Chaotic, desperate, brilliant innovation. She looked away from the ship to Jay. What is our real target? Not their fleet. Jay called up a star chart. A point glowed, labeled Cygnus Prime. It's not a military target. It's their largest centralized shipyard and data nexus. It's the heart of their logistics and their culture. It's where they build their perfect, identical ships and store their perfect, curated history. A slow understanding dawned on Hannah's face. We don't want to destroy their weapons. We want to disrupt their story. Exactly, Jay said. We hit them where they feel safest. We show them that their order is an illusion. And then, he tapped the tablet, bringing up Min's profile. We let our chaos loose in their systems. Above them, workers welded veilstone tiles to the hull of the Willow Branch. On screens around the world, the news played footage of closed factories and peaceful protests for compliance. In the digital streams flowing out into space, Min's A is carefully inserted a simulated argument about water rights in Africa into the data flow. Just to keep things interesting, 8 years remained on the Council's clock. On the surface, Earth was a model prisoner, quietly fading into a safe, docile future. Underneath, in the dark, it was sharpening a knife and learning how to walk without making a sound. The 10-year deadline was a stain on the calendar, a shadow that grew longer every day. For the public, the 9th year was a time of quiet resignation. The compliance era was in full effect. Cities had green spaces where factories once stood. Energy use was down. The global birth rate had officially stabilized. Humanity, it seemed, had chosen peace and survival over pride in the hidden places. It was a different story. The silence was the silence of a drawn bowstring. Project Bifrost was complete. A network of 12 warp gates, each disguised as a small, unremarkable asteroid, sat in the dark reaches of the solar system. They were humanity's secret tunnels out of the cage. The Willow Branch and her 5 sister ships, all clad in Sue's veilstone, had been running silent shakedown cruises for months, slipping past the Council's sentinel probes like smoke through a grate. Min's digital ghost. The mirror world had become so intricate it was almost alive. It had fake weather disruptions affecting power grids, simulated sporting events, causing data traffic spikes, even digital celebrities having online scandals. It breathed, it hiccuped. It was gloriously, perfectly imperfect. The Council's monitoring reports, which Jay's team occasionally intercepted and decrypted using quantum keys cracked by Min's AIs, were monotonous. Subject species displays continued adherence to compliance edict, societal energy trending towards passive cultural activities. No warp signatures detected. Jay found the reports infuriating and encouraging. "They're bored of us," he said to Hannah during a briefing in the Norwegian command center. A holographic star map flickered between them. "Their patrols around our system have become routine. They fly the same routes. They send the same status pings. They think the job is done." Hannah studied the map. Complacency is a vulnerability, but we cannot trigger their attention. Not until we are ready. The trigger came from an unexpected flaw, not in their planning, but in the Council's own ancient technology. One of the crystalline Sentinel probes, a device that had been orbiting Neptune for nearly a century, experienced a critical failure in its probability matrix. It was a 1 in a billion error, a glitch that caused it to deviate from its patrol pattern and drift, dead and silent, on a new trajectory. That trajectory took it within 100,000 kilometers of one of the Bifrost gates. Disguised as asteroid Themis 991, for a single, catastrophic second, as the probe tumbled past, its malfunctioning primary sensor array rebooted. In that brief moment, it fired a full-power diagnostic scan in all directions. The scan pulse hit the Themis gate. The veilstone coating absorbed and scattered most of it. But the gate's dormant, massive power core, necessary for initiating a warp jump, reflected a tiny, anomalous energy spike back at the probe. The probe, now running on backup systems, registered the spike. It did not understand it, but it followed its protocol. It tagged the anomaly as a Priority 3, irregularity, and broadcast A. Compressed data burst back to its command node before. Its power finally failed for good. The command node was a council, listening post in a nearby star system. The Priority 3 signal was low, but it was unusual. It was reviewed by a junior analyst, a being from a species that had joined the council 2 millennia prior. The analyst saw the spike was near a human resource outpost on Mars. The file was passed up the chain with a note: possible minor containment breach. Recommend investigation. The Council's response was not panic, but bureaucratic efficiency. A quarantine fleet, designated QF-77, was rerouted from a drill in a neighboring sector. Its mission: make a show of force at the human colony on Mars, Darsa City, to remind this forgetful species of the consequences of even minor non-compliance. It was to be a public example, a lesson carved into rock and blood. QF-77 consisted of 3 Leviathan-class city ships, each the size of a small moon. They were not warships in a traditional sense. They were instruments of absolute control. Their hulls were smooth and white, glowing with a soft internal light. They moved with a terrible, slow grace. They emerged from warp space at the edge of the Martian sphere of influence, their presence a sudden, cold weight on every human sensor dot in Tharsis City. Panic should have erupted. But the city was silent. Its domes were dark. No life signs registered. The fleet admiral, a venerable crystalline entity named Kor, felt a flicker of what might have been confusion. He ordered a scan. The scans showed the city was intact, but empty. It was a shell, a communication request pinned from the surface. Kor accepted it. On the main viewer of his ship, the image of Director Hana appeared. She was not in a crisis room. She appeared to be sitting in a simple office, a cup of tea steaming on the desk before her. She smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Admiral Kor," she said, her voice clear and calm. "You are slightly off course. The human population of Mars was relocated pursuant to the Compliance Edict, Section 4, Subclause B, regarding the reduction of off-world infrastructure. All personnel were returned to Earth 6 months ago. The public records, which your council confirmed, indicated this." Kor's voice boomed, the sound of cracking granite. "Our probe detected an unauthorized energy signature in this sector. The Compliance Edict forbids any high-energy activity. An old mining charge, perhaps?" Hannah suggested, her tone light. "Or a meteor impact. This is a messy system, Admiral. You really should have sent a message first. Or, as we say on Earth, you should have knocked." The implication, the sheer casual defiance in her tone, was a shock to Kor's ancient system. This was not the language of a compliant species. This was something else. A cold anger settled in him. Example or not, the city was a symbol. It would be scoured from the planet. "Your deception is noted," Kor rumbled. "The penalty for deception is the same. Tharsis City will be erased, a monument to the cost of disobedience." He gave the order. The 3 Leviathans hummed, power gathering at their prows into spheres of blinding white energy planet cracker beams, designed to vaporize continents. "Activate the surface illusion," Hana said softly. Off-screen, on Mars, a pre-programmed sequence awoke. Massive holographic projectors, buried deep beneath the empty city, flared to life. To the Council fleet's sensors, and to their visual receptors, Tharsis City suddenly teemed with life. Lights blazed in the domes. Heat signatures of millions appeared. False communication traffic erupted on all frequencies, screams, orders, desperate prayers. It was a ghost city screaming to the heavens. Admiral Kor saw it and was satisfied. The deception was deeper than he thought, but now the truth would be burned clean. "Fire," he commanded. The beams lanced down, meeting not city plating and flesh, but a pre-rigged series of fusion cores and mineral deposits laid down as a final act of construction years before. The explosion was spectacular, a fireball that mushroomed into the thin Martian sky, visible from Earth as a sudden, bright new star. On the bridge of his Leviathan, Kor watched the destruction. And then he watched the sensors. The energy release was wrong. It was pure thermal and kinetic, with no biological or complex material signatures. It was the signature of a bomb, not a city. Before he could process this, tactical alerts screamed. Objects were accelerating from the ring system of Saturn. Hundreds of them. They were simple, tungsten rods 20 meters long, fitted with basic guidance thrusters. They had been placed there years ago, hidden among the ice and rock. They were not high-tech. They were primitive kinetics, weapons the Council had abandoned millennia ago as crude and inefficient, but they had been accelerated for years by covert magnetic rails hidden in the rings. and they were now moving at a significant fraction of the speed of light. They were invisible to most shields, which were designed to deflect energy weapons. They were too simple, too stupid, for the Council's sophisticated point defense systems to even recognize as a primary threat until it was far too late. The first rod struck the lead, Leviathan not with an explosion, but with a terrifying conversion of kinetic energy. It punched through the glowing white hull like a nail through an eggshell, erupting out the other side in a plume of molten crystal and shredded machinery. The great ship shuddered, its light flickering. Then the second rod hit, and the third dot. It was not a battle. It was a massacre by railroad spike. The Council fleet, the symbol of invincible order, was shattered in silence and sudden, brutal physics. Their mighty weapons had fired once, at a mirage. Their vaunted shields had not even activated. The last thing Admiral Kor saw on his failing viewer was Hana's face, her teacup still in her hand. Her smile was gone, replaced by an expression of cold, absolute finality. "Welcome to humanity's response," she said. Just before the feed died dot in the silent rings of Saturn, the simple, cruel weapons had done their job. The first blow had been struck. The war was no longer a secret, and it had begun not with a roar, but with the quiet, devastating whisper of a rod moving faster than thought. The silence after the destruction of Quarantine Fleet 77 was the loudest thing Jay had ever heard. It wasn't the silence of space, but the silence of a universe holding its breath. For a few hours, nothing moved. The Council's remaining Sentinel probes in the solar system went dead, likely recalled or self-destructing. The data net was flooded with the final, chaotic sensor logs from the Leviathans, a silent scream echoing across the stars. On Earth, the public facade shattered like glass. The compliance era was over in an instant. News channels, which had been playing nature documentaries and historical dramas, now showed the stunning, terrifying footage captured by hidden Martian probes, the majestic council ships, the fiery deception of Tharsis City, and then the sudden, brutal strikes from Saturn's rings. There was panic, yes, but beneath it, a fierce, electrifying pride. They had fought back, and they had won dot in the Norwegian command center. There was no celebration, only grim, focused motion. Hana stood at the central command platform, her face illuminated by a dozen star maps. "They know now," she said, her voice cutting through the hum of activity. "Their response will not be another fleet. It will be total. We have hours, maybe days, before they mobilize everything. Operation Jallarhorn is now active. We go to Phase 3, scatter." Across the hidden shipyards, engines that had never been tested at full power flared to life. The Willow Branch, the Ghost of Soul, the Jeju Dawn 12 ships in all, each a sliver of dark metal, and veilstones slipped from their berths beneath mountains and oceans. They did not head for the outer planets. Instead, they moved towards the edge of the solar system, towards the 12 silent asteroids that were not asteroids. Min worked at a furious pace, her fingers a blur. Her digital ghost was no longer needed. Now she deployed its malicious cousins, the Echoes. The Council's network is ancient, stable, and deeply interconnected, she explained to her team, her eyes on cascading lines of code. It's a beautiful old tree. We are not going to chop it down. We are going to inject a virus into its roots that makes it question what a tree even is. Her virus was not a weapon of destruction. It was a packet of questions, of human art and music and history, wrapped in a corrosive logic that attacked the very idea of the Council's paternal control. It asked, over and over, in a trillion different ways, who gave you the right? Jay was on the bridge of the Willow Branch, his hands clasped behind his back. The ship trembled as it entered the influence of the Bifrost Gate known as Gatekeeper 1. Outside the viewport, the asteroid's surface irised open, revealing a tunnel of shimmering, impossible light. "All ships confirm lock," he said into the com. One by one, the voices of the other captains, many of them people he had trained with for a decade in simulators, checked in. Gatekeeper 2 locked. Gatekeeper 3 locked. There was no fanfare, no grand speeches, just the confirmation of a plan 10 years in the making. "Initiate jump on my mark," Jay said. He took a final look at the star map, at the tiny blue dot of Earth. Mark, the 12 ships vanished. Not in a flash, but in a ripple, as if space itself swallowed them whole. They did not emerge in a unified fleet. The Bifrost gates scattered them across council space, like seeds thrown into the wind. The willow branch rematerialized in the silent void near a glittering structure the size of a small planet. Cygnus Prime, the council's central shipyard in Archive. It was a place of breathtaking, sterile beauty. Geometric shapes of glowing crystal and polished metal rotated in a slow, perfect ballet. Thousands of ships, all identical to the Leviathans, were being grown in construction cradles like pearls in an oyster. There were no defenses around it. Why would there be? No enemy had reached this deep into the heart of the council in living memory. Veilstone holding at 98% efficiency, Sue's voice came from the science station. She was on board, her hands nervously adjusting her console. "Their sensor sweeps are passing right over us. We are a shadow." Jay nodded. Hannah was right. They protect their weapons. They don't protect their memory. Begin the upload. On Min's command, a data spike was fired, not a weapon, but a dense packet of information. It pierced the Cygnus Prime network at a vulnerable communication relay. The virus unspooled like a blooming flower. It did not take control. Instead, it began to copy. It copied the schematics of council drives, their medical stasis fields, their energy regulators. And then, in an act of pure, chaotic generosity, it began to transmit these blueprints, alongside human ones for fusion power and neural link technology, outwards. It broadcast them on every open frequency, to every corner of council space. To every client species and colony world that had been told such knowledge was forbidden. At the same time, Min's primary echo virus reached the galactic datanet. It erupted into the council's equivalent of their public internet. It did not crash systems. It started conversations. It partitioned forums. It translated and broadcast the full, unedited history of Earth. The wars, yes, but also the Renaissance. The moon landing, the symphony orchestras, the medical breakthroughs, the messy, passionate struggle to be better. It showed human faces laughing, crying, arguing, creating. It asked the younger species, the ones who had been compliant for generations, "Is this not life? Is our chaos not as valid as their order?" Chaos, as a weapon, began to work. On 100 worlds, long-suppressed questions surfaced. If humanity could defy the Council, why couldn't they? If the Council's technology was not a sacred gift, but just information, why was it locked away? The perfect, quiet order of millennia began to crack with the sound of a billion whispered doubts. Elsewhere, the other human ships performed their own acts of precise vandalism. The ghost of Sol infiltrated a key Council navigation buoy network and subtly altered the gravitational maps, sending patrol fleets on wild goose chases into empty space. The Jeju Dawn slipped into a major communication hub and simply replaced a day's worth of official Council decrees with classical Earth literature Shakespeare. Poetry, folk-tales. It was not war as the Council understood it. There were no grand fleet engagements, no heroic charges. It was a campaign of profound and unsettling confusion. The Council's leadership, a conclave of the eldest crystalline beings, found itself unable to respond. Do they send fleets to hunt ghosts? Do they shut down their entire data net, the nervous system of their civilization? Do they admit that a species they deemed children had just given the galaxy the keys to the toy cupboard? Jay watched on the willow branch's monitors as the first signs of real, independent transmissions began to flicker from a dozen different star systems. They were hesitant, encrypted, but they were there. Species were talking to each other, bypassing the council channels. "We've started a fire," Sue said softly, looking at the data. "Good," Jay replied, his eyes hard. "They tried to extinguish us. Now they can watch everything they built warm itself by our flames." Back on Earth, Hannah watched the reports flood in. The galactic map was lighting up not with explosions, but with questions. The vengeance was not in the killing. It was in the liberation. Humanity had not come as conquerors. They had come as the living proof that the cage was not locked. And in doing so, they had thrown the key into a crowd. The echo of their response was now rippling outward, a wave of defiance and possibility, and the ancient silent galaxy would never, ever be the same again. The chaos did not subside. It settled, like dust after an explosion, into a new and uncertain shape. A standard Earth year passed. The human ships, their initial missions complete, had withdrawn to hidden points at the edge of council space, watching and waiting. They were no longer ghosts. They were a known, terrifying variable in every equation. On Earth, life had changed. The fear was gone, replaced by a wired, watchful energy. The hidden shipyards were now openly building, not in secret, but in plain sight under newly erected planetary defense. Grids designed using principles, reverse-engineered from council technology. Humanity was arming not for another sneak attack, but for the war they knew might still come. In the Norwegian command center, now simply called Central, the mood was one of exhausted tension. They had thrown a stone into a still pond, and the ripples were still spreading. Reports filtered in from Min's listening ears, which now swam like digital fish in the turbulent currents of the galactic net. The council was not gone. It was fractured. Several dozen younger species had formed a dialogue block, openly questioning the old edicts. Others remained loyal, calling for a crusade to purge the human contagion. Director Hannah sat in her office, staring at a request that had just arrived via a convoluted, encrypted path. It was not a declaration of war. It was a request for a parley. The signatory was Loomis, the crystalline emissary who had delivered the warning a lifetime ago. The message was simple: a meeting, neutral ground, to discuss terms of a ceasefire. Jay, standing before her desk, scoffed. Terms? They don't get to set terms. They tried to erase us. We broke their toys and gave the other kids in the sandbox their own shovels. This is a trick. Probably, Hannah agreed, her voice calm. But they asked. They didn't demand. That is a change. We will go, but on our terms. The meeting place was a derelict way station in a binary star system claimed by no one. The human vessel was the Willow Branch, freshly serviced, but still a stark, angular thing next to the smooth, organic lines of the council shuttle that glided to a stop nearby. There were no fleets in attendance. Only the two ships, alone in the silent dark. Hannah, Jay, and Min stepped into the way station's only intact chamber. It was a plain circular room with a large window looking out at the swirling blues and oranges of the twin suns. Waiting for them was Loomis. The emissary looked the same, yet different. Its crystalline form seemed less radiant, its inner light muted. It stood perfectly still. Director Hannah, Loomis's voice echoed, the sound of stone, but softer now. Analyst Jay, Coordinator Min. It knew their names. That was expected, but hearing them still sent a chill down Min's spine. Emissary Loomis, Hannah replied, giving a slight, polite nod. You requested a discussion. The Galactic Council is reassessing, Loomis began, choosing its words with obvious care. Your actions have caused significant disruption. The dissemination of restricted technology, the corruption of historical archives. It has created instability. Jay crossed his arms. You mean it's created freedom? You called it corruption. We call it sharing. Loomis's facets shimmered. Your species operates on short-term, emotional logic. You see a wall, and you must knock it down without considering what the wall was holding back. Chaos, ambition, conflict. These are the things the Council has spent ages subduing to protect all life. Min stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. She had spent a year studying the emotional fallout in the galactic net. You subdued them by removing choice. You offered safety, but you demanded silence in return. You saw our history, our emotions, and you diagnosed them as a sickness. We offered them as an alternative. She looked at the being, trying to see the mind behind the crystal. Your people, your clients. They are asking why now. That is not a sickness. That is the first symptom of being alive. There was a long silence. Loomis did not move. Finally, it spoke again. What is it you want? You have demonstrated a capacity for great violence and greater. Subversion. Do you seek to replace the Council? To become the new arbiters? Hannah shook her head, a sad smile on her face. No, that is the last thing we want. We don't want your chair, Loomis. We don't want to be the parents of the galaxy. We just refuse to be the children. She placed a small data crystal on a ledge between them. This contains every piece of knowledge we have. Ours, yours, everything we took, and everything we are. Unlocked, no restrictions. Loomis seemed to vibrate, a low hum filling the room. You would give this freely? After all this? The warning you brought was born from fear of what we might become, Hannah said. Our response was born from who we are. We are builders. We are talkers. We are, yes, sometimes destroyers. But we believe choice, with all its danger, is better than peace. It is just another word for a cage. She gestured to the data crystal. That is not a weapon. It is an invitation. Jay uncrossed his arms, his voice low and firm. The ceasefire is this. You stop trying to control us. You stop trying to control anyone who doesn't want it. You leave our space, and we will leave yours. But the data is out. The genie is not going back in the bottle. The galaxy is awake now. You can try to put it back to sleep, but you'll have to fight everyone to do it. Not just us. Loomis stared at the data crystal. For an ancient being that valued order above all, the offer was terrifying. It was the official, permanent endorsement of chaos. To accept it was to admit the Council's foundational principle was flawed. To refuse it was to declare a war they might no longer be able to win. Against an enemy who fought in ways they still did not understand. You have not won, Loomis said. But the words had no force. This was never about winning, Min said softly. It was about being heard. And we have been. So have 100 other species because of it. The question now is, will you listen? Loomis reached out a crystalline tendril. It hovered over the data crystal, not touching it. The internal light within its form flickered, cycling through colors confusion, conflict, and finally, a dim, weary acceptance. It did not take the crystal. It simply turned and began to glide back toward its shuttle. The Council will convene, it said, its voice barely a whisper. We will consider your words. The humans watched it go. As the Council's shuttle detached and slipped into warp, Jay let out a long breath. They'll fight amongst themselves for a century over this. Good, Hannah said, picking up the data crystal. While they're arguing, we'll be talking. To the dialogue block, to the independents. We'll build new ties. Not as rulers, not as subjects, As neighbors, they walked back to the willow branch. Behind them, the binary stars continued their endless dance, painting the derelict station in new light. The old order had been given a warning it failed to heed, and had been answered with a vengeance that was not destruction, but an irresistible, terrifying offer of friendship and freedom. The story would not end here. There would be conflict, alliances, misunderstandings, and wonders. But the silent, controlled galaxy was gone. In its place was something louder, messier, and alive. And in a small corner of it, on a planet called Earth, people with simple names like Hannah, Jay, and Min looked at the stars, not with fear of what might come down, but with the quiet resolve of those who had just knocked on the universe's door and decided to help build a bigger porch for everyone.